Welcome to the Economists in Your Ear podcast. When world leaders meet and the headlines scream no breakthrough, no tangible results, well, what really happened behind all the pomp and circumstance? Was it truly just political theater, or was there maybe more strategic maneuvering going on than met the eye? Today we're going to unpack a really fascinating case study, that recent meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin up in Anchorage. We'll look at The Economist's insightful take on it, naturally, but then using some additional perspectives, we'll try to pull back the curtain a bit, look at some other crucial angles, and hopefully give you a fuller, maybe more nuanced picture. Our mission isn't just to summarize what The Economist said, but to really try and understand the layers of meaning and, importantly, the implications for you. So let's start by looking at the immediate optics, right? And The Economist's initial assessment of this very high-profile encounter. From the moment Putin stepped off his plane, The Economist portrays his trip as a clear triumph, basically transforming him, in their words, from pariah to honored guest on American soil. What strikes you first about this whole theatrical display? Especially since The Economist highlights Trump, wanting to project power, but maybe ending up displaying diplomatic weakness.
Yeah, what's immediately compelling, I think, is how much agreement there is across different reports on the optics. That the visual element was the primary, maybe even the only, immediate outcome. We saw no tangible progress reported on any actual agreements, just this, as you said, carefully choreographed ceremony. And yes, Putin absolutely left Anchorage with some very powerful imagery. When we talk about weaponizing that imagery, well, he can use it back home, can he, to project this image of legitimacy, of being on an equal footing with the U.S. It sort of undermines Western efforts to isolate him. So that visual triumph The Economist talks about, that's spot on. But it does raise a critical question for me. Why? Why put so much effort into the show if there's no actual deal coming out of it? And what does it really mean when America's top fighter jet, the F-22, which, as The Economist points out, is normally kept well away from prying eyes, is parked right there, alongside B-2 bombers and F-35 escorts, forming what some even called a guard of honor? What's the message there?
That is a powerful observation. Okay, so beyond those immediate optics, what else did The Economist accurately flag as a, let's say, significant outcome or maybe a key concern from this summit?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, The Economist very clearly highlights the serious risk to Ukraine's agency. That's crucial. Trump's public comment, that Zelensky's got to make a deal, and the concerning absence of that three-way summit with the Ukrainian leader, which Trump himself had sort of floated earlier, that's deeply worrying for Kyiv. It really underscores that concern that a separate Trump-Putin track could indeed sideline Ukraine. And what's also critical here, and both our sources strongly agree on this point, is Putin's unchanged demands. His insistence on eliminating what he sees as the primary causes of the conflict, which, let's be clear, means Ukraine's independence and its NATO aspirations. That signifies absolutely no shift from Russia's long-held position. That consistency tells you quite a bit, I think, about Moscow's strategic thinking. They're not budging on fundamentals.
Okay, so The Economist paints this picture of pretty clear gift to Putin, certainly on the optical front. But if we try to strip away those immediate headlines, are there maybe some crucial counterpoints? Things that might offer a more nuanced understanding of what actually happened? What's the first thing we should maybe consider that challenges that simple gift framing?
Right, and this is where the analysis gets really interesting, I think, because while it's easy, maybe too easy, to see the optical gift, that framing might overlook the potential for, strategic leverage and even intelligence gathering for Washington. Think about it. A face-to-face meeting, even one without some big signed deal, can still be incredibly valuable. It's a chance to clarify red lines, maybe get a better sense of timelines, and test how sincere certain proposals really are. Like, for instance, remember before the summit, Putin explicitly sort of dangled this idea of linking arms control talks to other things.
Yes, tying nuclear talks to maybe sanctions relief or something else.
That's exactly classic linkage politics. So the meeting itself allowed Washington to sort of probe that. Was this a genuine diplomatic opening, however small, or just a tactic, a ploy to try and wriggle out of sanctions? So even if no deal followed, Washington likely gained some valuable signals, some insights into Moscow's bargaining script and maybe their real priorities. It's not just about what's said publicly, is it? It's also about what's revealed in that direct interaction.
That's a really good point. So Washington might have gained valuable intel on Moscow's playbook, even without a formal agreement. But how did this apparent gift, as The Economist framed it, land with America's key allies? Did Europe and Ukraine just sort of passively accept this narrative, or was there a more active response we should be aware of?
Oh, not at all passive. Trump immediately told the media he'd brief Zelensky and NATO, which itself shows an awareness of likely allied concerns, right? But the really sharp reactions came quickly from European and Ukrainian officials. They almost immediately called it a PR win for Putin, voiced worries about potential pressure for land swaps. And these strong, very public reactions, they actually help sort of fence in the negotiating space going forward.
How so?
Well, in a way, the gift came bundled with this immediate, visible European hardening. And that hardening can actually raise the diplomatic price tag for any future concessionary deal Washington might consider. So this immediate countermove by the allies, that's crucial context. It's often missed if you just focus narrowly on the summit itself as a simple gift. It changes the dynamics down the road.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about the visual win for Putin and how Washington might have still gained strategic signals. But let's dig into another key visual The Economist focused on. That display of the F-22 Raptors. The Economist suggested it exposed America's diplomatic weakness, allowed prying eyes on sensitive aircraft. What's your take on that assessment? Is that the whole story?
Yeah, that analysis of the F-22 display, it brings up a really interesting point about how military power gets projected, doesn't it? I mean, you see B-2s and F-22s showcased fairly often, right? At air shows, national events, parking them on a ramp like that. It isn't typically about handing over classified performance data. It's usually not that simple. Instead, it's often theater, isn't it? Theater for deterrence, the U.S. showing off its formidable power.
So it's about sending a message.
Exactly. It becomes propaganda fodder for both sides, potentially. For Washington, it visually reinforces strength, advanced capability. Look what we have. For Moscow, maybe they spin it differently as proof of Russia's return to the world stage, engaging as an equal with a major power, rather than just a sign of American weakness. So that criticism about up-close imagery, I think it's largely about the optics of potential vulnerability, not necessarily about actual secrets being compromised. It feels less about technical espionage and more about the psychological gamesmanship of these military displays, almost like a high-stakes poker game maybe, both sides trying to project confidence and strength.
That's a fascinating angle on strategic messaging. Okay, now, The Economist also concluded there was no glint of a nuclear arms control deal, suggesting it wasn't really even on the table in Anchorage. But our understanding from the broader context suggests Putin actually did float this idea beforehand. How do we sort of reconcile those two views?
Indeed. Yeah, while The Economist might not have seen a concrete glint of a finalized deal, which is probably true, Putin very publicly floated the idea of arms control talks right before he went to Anchorage. And this feels like a classic Kremlin move, what some call wedge politics.
Possibly politics, meaning?
Meaning it's designed to potentially sow discord, either among allies or maybe within U.S. domestic opinion. You offer something that sounds superficially appealing, like arms control talks, hoping to divide your opponents. The likely goal: coaxing sanctions relief, recasting Russia as this responsible co-guarantor of global stability, all while maintaining their battlefield leverage in Ukraine, of course. So if you ignore that tactic, you kind of miss how Moscow uses the process of diplomacy itself, just the offer of talks, to try and blunt international pressure. It's not always about actually reaching an immediate agreement. It's often about shifting perceptions, leveraging any opening, even just a rhetorical one, to their advantage.
Okay, that's a crucial distinction. The difference between a concrete deal and the strategic use of an offer. And this leads us to another important point, doesn't it? About normalization versus the actual costs involved. The Economist certainly highlighted the trip as a pure honors win for Putin. But there's a pretty significant shadow hanging over this, isn't there? Especially with that ICC indictment.
Oh, there absolutely is a shadow. You cannot just ignore the International Criminal Court indictment hanging over Putin. So calling the trip a pure honors win for him, well, it discounts the very real political cost, domestic and international, that Trump absorbs for rolling out the red carpet for an indicted leader. Even though the U.S. isn't an ICC member itself, offering that kind of high-level hospitality carries a significant reputational cost globally. It could undermine U.S. moral authority, draw criticism from key allies who do strongly support the ICC and its mandate.
Right, that makes sense.
That cost, it's not trivial, and it could actually shrink the U.S. room for making concessions later on, as Trump might face more domestic and allied pressure to demonstrate toughness afterwards. So this reputational blowback, regardless of the legal technicalities of ICC membership, it matters deeply in international relations.
Okay, finally, let's think about who moved whom in this interaction. The Economist seemed to stress U.S. weakness, pointing out that Trump's threats of very severe consequences if the talks failed. Well, they weren't immediately acted upon right after the meeting. What's your nuanced take on that particular assessment? Was it really weakness?
Well, look, it's fair to note those specific threats weren't followed by immediate concrete actions right on the day. That's true. But it's also important, I think, to remember that such vague threats were quite possibly intended as negotiating theatrics, maybe aimed primarily at domestic audiences back in the U.S.
Selling toughness at home.
Exactly. But that kind of theatricality, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? It might be useful for domestic consumption, but it can be counterproductive with a country like Russia if it isn't backed up by specific, credible, probably multilateral penalties if demands aren't met. So the absence of immediate consequences doesn't automatically equal weakness. It could mean a shift in strategy is coming, or maybe just that the threats were never really intended to be acted upon instantly. It just highlights that complex dance between domestic messaging and the tougher realities of international diplomacy.
Right. Okay. So after this deeper analysis, trying to look beyond the headlines, what does this all mean for you, the listener? And maybe more importantly, what should we all be watching for in the coming days and weeks to see how this really complex narrative unfolds?
Yeah, the immediate focus really shifts to Monday, August 18th. That's when Ukrainian President Zelensky is due in Washington. And the key question for all of us watching is, will the White House present something concrete? A framework for future action that's actually endorsed by Ukraine? Or is it going to be more atmospherics, more symbolic gestures, maybe some vague statements, kind of like we saw in Anchorage itself? The substance, or lack thereof, in that meeting will be highly indicative, I think.
And will we see any kind of follow-through on those severe consequences that Trump threatened if the talks with Putin failed?
Indeed. That's the critical test, isn't it? Will there be a defined sanctions package, maybe targeting Russia's energy sector, perhaps shipping, maybe major banks, something tangible? Or will it just be a rhetorical reset, a return to the pre-summit sort of posture without any new, real pressure? We also really need to watch for any working-level contacts starting up between the U.S. and Russia on strategic weapons. That would essentially confirm the Kremlin's linkage campaign is still active.
Yeah.
Their attempt to connect arms control talks with broader geopolitical concessions, trying to trade one for the other. And it would also test whether Washington is actually entertaining that kind of linkage without seeing real progress on the ground in Ukraine first. That's a key dynamic to watch.
Okay, and turning finally to our European allies, what will their reactions, and more importantly their actions, tell us about the broader response?
Well, their initial statements already indicated quite a bit of concern, didn't they? Almost a sense of Putin 1, West 0 on the optics front. But beyond the rhetoric, we'll need to watch for concrete steps. Things like, are there increased military or financial aid commitments going to Ukraine? Is there any significant ramping up of European defense production specifically to support Kyiv more effectively in the long run? Or maybe new legal steps, things like stricter enforcement of existing sanctions, or even real progress on directing those frozen Russian asset proceeds towards Ukraine's recovery. Those are the kinds of tangible responses that will truly shape the narrative beyond the initial summit headlines and show whether the response is unified and strong or maybe somewhat fractured.
So, in the end, it seems The Economist was certainly right that Putin left Anchorage with some valuable imagery, stuff he'll definitely weaponize back home and internationally. And Ukraine, well, clearly got no immediate ceasefire or breakthrough. But just labeling the summit a simple gift maybe flattens a much more complex picture, doesn't it? This was very optics-heavy, perhaps substance-light statecraft, where Moscow was probing for sanctions relief, maybe probing for arms control cover. Washington was testing if any minimal pause was possible, or if there was any genuine diplomatic avenue there at all. And all the while, the allies were watching closely and recalibrating their own positions in response.
Yeah, and this really raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider going forward. If the next moves we see are genuinely ally-backed and, crucially, Ukraine-led, could Anchorage ultimately prove to be a rather costly photo op for the Kremlin in the long run, rather than a durable strategic win? Or if this meeting somehow morphs into renewed pressure on Kyiv down the line, pressure to trade land for some kind of peace deal, well, will The Economist's initial quite stark headline have actually captured the real trajectory early on?
We certainly hope this analysis has given you a more nuanced understanding of what was undoubtedly a pivotal moment in international relations. Keep those questions coming. And as always, stay curious.